So I recently watched the fantastic Red Dead Redemption 2 video by one Kyle Kringle, which you'll find linked below in the description, which made some very good points about the issues you may face if you choose to linger in chapter 2 of the title. So taking inspiration from that particular content, today I'm going to be putting my own opinion on the topic, the parts I agree with and the ones of which I'm a little more skeptical of. So hopefully you guys will enjoy. Welcome to the video. You're listening to Phil of Philby Gaming. If you enjoy the following, you all know what to do, and if you're new to the channel and haven't subscribed already, after watching, please consider doing so. Without further delay, let's begin with today's content. Why you shouldn't spend too long at Horseshoe Overlook. So to give a brief introduction to those that don't know, and please feel free to skip this portion of the video using the available option provided, let's take a brief recap of the events leading up to the arrival at Horseshoe Overlook. Following the infamous Blackwater Ferry heist, the Van der Linde gang, under leadership of father figure and mentor Dutch Van der Linde, escaped the southern regions, heading northwest in the snow-covered mountains of Ambarino, north of West Elizabeth. Battling against terrain and ferocious stormy weather, the faction of around 20 or so strong find shelter in an old abandoned mining town known as Coulter. From Coulter, the gang does what it can to recuperate from the ferry heist disaster, collecting themselves as they mourn the loss of two members, Davy Callender and Jenny Kirk, as well as ponder upon the fate of the likes of Sean Maguire and Matt Callender, brother of Davy, whose respective situations remain a mystery following their capture during said heist. Sending top gunmen such as John Marston and Micah Bell on ahead to scout for the pursuing Blackwater Police Department and Pinkerton detective agents, Dutch Van der Linde attempts to keep things together, first by sending out scouts to recruit these men, with himself in tow. During one of these, to which Dutch travels alongside Arthur Morgan, the duo find Micah Bell, who informs them that he's found a homestead, claiming that the place is ablaze with light and noise, emphasising a party of some sorts. During their initial investigation, it's quickly understood that the homestead is occupied by a rivaling gang, the O'Driscolls, led by one Colm O'Driscoll. After dealing with the foes, the trio soon learn that the original proprietor is a lady named Sadie Adler, whose husband has tragically been murdered by the O'Driscolls as they attempted to vacate the home, with intentions of taking over, using the establishment as shelter for themselves. Upon this discovery, Dutch takes Sadie into his care, protecting her, whilst the gang figure out what to do with her. Meanwhile, as the gang somewhat settles into their temporary home of Coulter, attempting to scrounge what food and supplies they can to survive, Dutch continues to play outlaw, insisting on continuing his criminal ways after learning that the rivaling O'Driscolls were up this way planning a train heist, a heist he plans to steal from their clutches. Following an altercation where himself, alongside several of his gang, take out numerous rivals, he obtains the details of the train heist, of which is owned by oil tycoon Leviticus Cornwall, and proceeds with the detailed heist. Just prior to the heist, the gang capture one of the O'Driscolls as a prisoner, one Kieran Duffy, with intentions of using him to obtain information on the gang. Although the heist doesn't go quite as planned, the job is considered a success, as Dutch Van der Linde and his boys manage to obtain a handful of bearer bonds, with intentions of later cashing these in for monetary gain. So following this, with the snow thawed out enough for the gang to travel, they head to the area of Horseshoe Overlook, a relatively quiet location in the region known as the Heartlands. So with the completing of the first chapter, Coulter, and now being introduced to the next portion, Horseshoe Overlook, the gang settles into their new home, with intentions of continuing to evade the local authorities. But what some speculate, and there's definitely some food for thought behind it, is that the second chapter of Red Dead Redemption is not much more than a continued introductory chapter, similar to the opening prologue. So why do some people opt to blitz through this portion of the title, as opposed to savouring the later chapters? Well, let's take a deep dive into exactly what this segment really brings to the table, beginning with the narrative itself. The narrative during Chapter 2, for the most part, doesn't really progress the tale in a significant way. For example, very early on, several members of the Van der Linde gang, Arthur, Charles, Bill and Javier, attempt to enjoy a few drinks at a tavern in the local town to Horseshoe, Valentine. The quiet drink soon erupts into a large bar brawl, with the gang facing off against the locals. The conflict soon spills out onto the street, where our protagonist Arthur Morgan battles the local brute Tommy, soon gaining the upper hand. Now the main narrative points during this seem to be the introduction of Thomas Downs, a local do-gooder, as Arthur refers to him, as well as the reintroduction of gang associate Josiah Trelawney, of whom the latter informs Dutch and the boys of the current situation of one of the missing gunmen, Sean Maguire. Now yes, this information is important, but was the entire bar brawl necessary to this? The two don't seem to coincide narratively. Later, back in the same town, Uncle and Arthur escort a couple of the girls of the gang, Karen, Tilly and Mary Beth, as the trio attempt to scout the local settlement and see what mischief they can involve themselves in. The plan turns somewhat sour as Arthur is forced to intervene, saving the likes of both Tilly and Karen from some undesirables. Following this, a man called Jimmy Brooks appears to recognise Arthur from his time in Blackwater, forcing the protagonist to give chase as he attempts to keep the gang's current location under wraps. This segment introduces the player to the decision-making aspect of Red Dead Redemption 2, offering a look into the honour level system. Now of course, this is a major aspect of the title, but it would appear that this entire mission was primarily formed, with the exception of introducing a little of Tilly's history, as well as the shopping ability in the title, to simply introduce the honour meter. What we also have, and I'm sure I might get some flack for this one, as it's a very popular mission, is the Drinking with Lenny quest. What exactly does this introduce? We learn at the beginning of this from Lenny himself that Micah, whilst out scouting ahead, has been incarcerated by the local law of Strawberry, prompting Dutch to request a rescue mission. But what else does this exactly bring to the narrative? Not a great deal. We can meet with Tommy once more during this, the big brute whom we fought earlier, but this is an interaction that's easily missed by players, not really adding to the tale of the Van der Linde gang story. I agree that not all the missions in Chapter 2 have little relevance to the narrative, such as the interaction with Thomas Downs, but for the most part it almost feels like filler content, introducing certain aspects of gameplay in exchange for a strong narrative, which takes us on over to our next discussion. So during the prologue in Coulter, we're introduced to certain elements of gameplay, such as tracking prey, gunplay, hand-to-hand combat and the use of the Deadeye system for example, and although our time at Horseshoe shines a light on further aspects, it still almost feels like a continuation of a tutorial. During Chapter 2, as we continue on through the plot, the game introduces us to such things as house burglaries with Hosea, as well as fencing stolen items and hunting legendary animals, taking on and collecting bounties from the local sheriff's office, fishing, although this is oddly introduced much later in the chapter as we border on Chapter 3, and debt collection missions from Herr Strauss, although admittedly one of which is significant to the narrative. Aside from further gameplay aspects, it seems to not introduce a great deal more. One thing it does introduce is the missing gang members, those who were captured during the infamous ferry heist and those who have gone astray since. So who do we have? Let's start with everyone's favourite drunkard, Orville Swanson. The once clergyman, who's now a prisoner in himself, succumbed to his own addictions, has headed out alone in search of only Lord knows what. Sent to retrieve, Arthur finds the inebriated individual partaking in a round or two of poker with some locals south of the camp at Flatneck Station. Noticing that Swanson is so intoxicated he can't think straight, Arthur defends his friend from those he feels are taking advantage of him. Swanson is quick to defend the locals before trailing off on his travels alone. Although it's one of my favourite cutscenes in the title, this particular mission is once again a further example of the game introducing us to yet another aspect of gameplay, the poker/gambling portion. So who else do we re-recruit? Sean Maguire. Following the information produced to us by gang affiliate Josiah Trelawney, Arthur heads down into the region of southern West Elizabeth on the outskirts of Blackwater, the town in which the gang are currently highly sought out by the local law. With Javier, Charles and Trelawney himself in tow, the trio learn of Sean being transported from one set of individuals to another, currently in the captivity of Ike Skelding's group, a faction of bounty hunters. Carefully launching an assault on the large force, the group of three rescue the young whippersnapper, saving him from either incarceration or a hanging. As the mission closes, Arthur mentions that he may stick around the site as the others return to Horseshoe, as he wishes to take a look around. In doing so, this introduces the wanted system of the title. But aside from rescuing Sean and returning home, does this offer much more to the narrative other than simple progression into the next portion, whereas Sean is later required? We also have the rescue of Micah Bell, who remains in a holding cell in the western region of the in-game world at the town of Strawberry. Although, if we think outside the box a little, this particular mission introduces a multiple approach aspect to missions, which is certainly helpful, It could still be perceived that this is a little more than a continuation of reforming the gang before we make our way into the following chapter. Whether it was Rockstar Games' intentions of simply introducing more of the map to the player, as well as a slight increase into the understanding of the character of Micah, remains to be seen. And lastly, in concerns to regrouping, albeit this is one slightly different, is the recruitment of Kieran Duffy. Since Coulter, Kieran has been tied to a tree at Horseshoe as a prisoner of the Van der Linde gang due to his former association with the rivaling O'Driscolls. Using Kieran as an asset, a few members threaten him with torture in exchange for the location of Colm O'Driscoll. Eventually revealing his last known location, Arthur, Bill and John take the former associate to Six Point Cabin with intentions of ending this blood feud once and for all. Although Colm was no longer at this location, slightly adding to the narrative in concern to the rivalry, this does little in respect to this, with of course the exception of Kieran's acceptance and initiation, if you will, into the Van der Linde family itself. So with the gang now fully formed together, in terms of plot, did we make any real progress? Some may believe the answer to be not really. But what of the camp of Horseshoe Overlook itself, as well as those who currently inhabit it? Let's take a look at some of the key figures and the halt in character development and progression, and determine still why some choose to rush this chapter in respect of continuing with this incredible tale of Red Dead Redemption 2, beginning with the second to newest recruit, Sadie Adler. Much further in the narrative, in particular the epilogue portion of the title, Sadie became this kick-ass bounty hunter who needs no one else in the world. We begin to see the development of her character forming into this as early as the opening segments of Chapter 3, but throughout the entirety of Chapter 2, Sadie is still grieving the loss of both her husband and home, understandably moping around camp with no real purpose in life, unsure of what steps to take next. Any attempt to maintain a conversation with Sadie is ended after a brief line or two, as Arthur and the gang constantly try to reassure Sadie that things will get better, only to receive a morbid response. We also have the character of Red Dead Redemption 1 protagonist and later protagonist during the epilogue portion of RDR2, John Marston, in particular his current relationship with both Abigail Roberts and their son, Jack. Early on, John strongly believes that the young boy is not biologically his. He is often dismissive of any interaction with Jack and Abigail, in spite of pleas from some of the gang members such as Hosea Matthews and even leader Dutch Van der Linde himself. Of course, as the story progresses, John finally accepts that whether Jack is his own offspring or not, he truly is his father, but during Chapter 2, it's a very different tale altogether. Examples such as John's relationship and Sadie's character progression are just a few to name concerning the members of the Van der Linde gang, as each member progresses through their own journey in life, forming a development within themselves, prompting some gamers to once more push through this particular chapter of the title. But of course, as I said in the opening segment of this video, I don't completely agree with all of this. In fact, Chapter 2 is probably my favourite in Red Dead Redemption. It opens up the world to us, allowing us to explore locations and settlements, as well as meet a wide array of characters in between. Unlike the majority of Grand Theft Auto titles, from the completion of the prologue, as soon as we arrive at Horseshoe Overlook, we're free to explore the entire setting of the title. With the missions not being as narrative-based as the later chapters, it allows us to concentrate on other aspects of the world, including my personal favourite of hunting animal pelts for camp upgrades, as well as new clothing and saddles from the trapper. Rockstar introduced this chapter at the right time in my opinion. The opinion of rescuing/recruiting the stray gang members could also be perceived as giving us time with each individual, allowing us to learn their respective characters and position within the gang. We're given time to learn about the members, their traits too. Whereas the prologue reeled off the Blackwater ferry heist, Chapter 2 granted us a breather before we enter Chapter 3, giving us time to appreciate and explore the open world we now find ourselves in, somewhat halting the primary story progression for the most part, in exchange for respecting, exploring and appreciating the open world aspect that Rockstar Games have beautifully created for our enjoyment. So what do you think of your time in Chapter 2 of the title? Do you rush through it in search of the narrative, or do you live in the moment and enjoy the more open world aspect of what we're offered? Let me know below in the comment section. If you enjoyed what you saw today, you all know what to do, and if you're new to the channel and haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. Once again, I want to give a shout out to Kyle Kringle and their particular take on this topic, as it was a major inspiration for the making of this video. If you wish to check out theirs, something of which I definitely recommend, you'll find it linked below in the video description, as well as the end screen to this one. Thank you all for watching. You've been listening to Phil of Philby Gaming, and I'll see you in the next video.